3 knocks cut through the wind like axe blows. Mai's hand froze over the pot of rice stew, steam curling into the cold air between her and the door. The blizzard had been building since noon, turning the world beyond her cabin into a howling white void. No one came this far up the ridge. Not in winter, not ever, if they could help it. She grabbed her late husband's rifle from above the mantel. Her hands trembled as she approached the frosted window. Through the ice-clouded glass, she saw him, a tall cowboy, broad-shouldered, holding a small boy slumped against his chest. Behind them, 2 horses stood with their heads down, flanks shivering, near collapse. The boy's lips were blue. Mai's heart hammered against her ribs. The last strangers who'd come to her door had sneered at the unfamiliar scent of ginger from her cooking and the foreign characters her husband had carved into the doorframe, then rode away laughing. But this child, her father-in-law's voice echoed in her memory. Hospitality is a debt we owe to the heavens, especially in a storm. She set down the rifle and opened the door. Snow exploded inward, swirling around her ankles. The cold bit through her thin shawl. The cowboy's face was weathered, his eyes dark and desperate beneath the brim of his hat. He said, his voice like cracked earth. Please? Just that one word, but it carried the weight of miles and fear and a father's helplessness. Mai stepped aside. They crossed the threshold, bringing the storm's fury with them. She pushed the door shut, and suddenly the howling wind muted to a dull roar against the logs. The silence between the 3 of them felt as heavy as wet snow. The cowboy stood there, dripping, the boy limp in his arms. By the fire, Mai said, gesturing. He moved with surprising grace for a man his size, kneeling before her small hearth. She grabbed her only spare quilt, one her mother-in-law had stitched with a silk phoenix before she died, and wrapped it around the child. The boy couldn't have been more than 8. His clothes were fine but travel-worn, his small hands like ice. How long have you been riding? Mai asked, already reaching for the kettle. Too long, the cowboy's voice cracked. She boiled water for tea, weak as it was, and ladled her thin rice and vegetable stew into 2 chip bowls. The cowboy watched her with an intensity that made her nervous, but he said nothing, just held his son close until the boy's shivering eased. When the child finally opened his eyes, they were the color of a summer sky. Thank you, he whispered, his voice small and proper. Mai felt something crack inside her frozen heart. She handed them the bowls. The boy ate ravenously. The cowboy barely touched his, just watched his son with the vigilance of a man who'd already lost too much. Night deepened. The storm raged on. Mai added another log to the fire and tried not to notice how the cowboy's eyes tracked her every movement, not with threat, but with something sadder. Gratitude, maybe, or disbelief that kindness still existed. When the boy finally fell asleep wrapped in the phoenix quilt, the cowboy stood at the window, staring into the white void outside. Mai watched him from across the room. They're not just lost, she realized. They're running. She woke to find the cowboy already awake, seated by the dying fire, watching his son sleep like a man guarding gold. Dawn crept through the gaps in the shutters, pale and cold. The storm had weakened but still howled beyond the walls. Mai rose quietly, stirring the coals and adding kindling. Morning, she said. He nodded but didn't speak. She set about making breakfast, steamed buns from her dwindling flour, a small jar of pickled plums. The tea leaves stretched thin. The cowboy stood without being asked and began helping, moving with a practiced ease that spoke of years cooking over campfires. When the boy woke, he sat up slowly, blinking at the rafters. Pa, where are we? He asked. Safe, the cowboy said. For now. Ah, so they were father and son, Mai had wondered. Might I have a bun? The boy asked, his diction far too perfect for a drifter's child. All you want, Mai said, studying him. She noticed things as they ate. The horses outside, visible through the window, were of fine breeding, even under the trail dust. The cowboy's coat was worn thin at the elbows but stitched with expert precision. The boy's hands were soft despite the cold, his nails clean. These weren't ordinary drifters. "How far were you headed?" she asked, keeping her tone light. "Far enough," the cowboy said. A long pause filled only by the crackle of the fire. She wanted to press, but his jaw was set firm. Instead, she glanced outside at the swirling snow. "Storm's getting worse. Another 3 days, maybe, before the trail's passable." The cowboy's shoulders tensed. "We can't. You can't ride, my cut-in. Your horses are spent. Your boy's half frozen. You'll die on that mountain." He met her eyes then, and she saw the war behind them, pride against necessity, fear against hope. "We could work," he said finally. "For our keep. Fix things." Mai looked around her cabin, the broken fence outside, half collapsed from last year's snow, the sagging shed door, the firewood pile nearly gone. Her husband had been dead 2 winters, and she'd been holding this place together with nothing but stubbornness and memory. 3 days, she said. "Then you ride on." 3 days, he agreed. The boy smiled for the first time, small and tentative, like sun through storm clouds. "I'm Sam," he said. "This is my pa, John." "My," she said. They shook hands across the rough-hewn table. His grip was calloused but gentle. She felt the warmth of it long after he let go. John split like a man born to it, his rhythm steady, his breath fogging in the cold air. Each log fell perfectly. Mai stood at her window watching. She hadn't heard that sound in 2 years, not since her husband's axe had fallen silent for good. Sam darted around the yard, collecting eggs from the henhouse, his laughter bright against the snow. The storm had finally broken that morning, leaving the world white and glittering under a pale sun. The boy ran up to her, breathless. "Miss Mai, 6 eggs. That's the most they've laid all week. Pa says they must be happy to have company." Mai smiled despite herself. She'd forgotten what it felt like, voices in her home, warmth beyond the fire, the simple rhythm of 2 other heartbeats nearby. That evening, while Sam slept by the hearth, John sat across from her at the table. He'd repaired her shed door, rehung the chicken coop gate, and chopped enough firewood to last her the rest of the winter. "Your husband taught you well," he said quietly. "He taught me everything," Mai replied. "My family sent me from my home across the sea for him. We built this place together. I'm trying to do right by my boy, too." John's eyes drifted to Sam. "His mother, a year ago." Mai's chest tightened. "I'm sorry. She was good. Better than I deserved." He paused. "Died bringing our second child into the world. The baby didn't make it either." The words hung in the air like frost. Mai didn't know what to say, so she said nothing, just reached across the table and touched his hand briefly. He looked at her touch like it was something holy. Later, after he'd gone outside to check the horses, Mai found a gold pocket watch on the floor, fallen from his coat when she'd hung it to dry. She picked it up, turning it over. Engraved on the back were the initials J, T, H and a family crest she didn't recognize. Her breath caught. This wasn't a drifter's watch. This was wealth. She tucked it back into his coat pocket without a word. The third morning dawned clear and cold. The trail down the mountain was passable now. She heard Sam's voice outside pleading, "Can't we stay longer, Pa? I like it here." John's answer came soft through the door. "So do I, son. So do I." Mai stood frozen at the stove, her heart hammering. She should let them go. She barely knew them. They'd be gone in an hour, and her life would return to its quiet, lonely rhythm. But when John came inside, she heard herself say, "Your horse threw a shoe. You should check it before you ride." It was true, she'd noticed yesterday but had said nothing. John examined the hoof and nodded slowly. "One more day, then." Sam's whoop of joy echoed across the ridge. Mai turned away, hiding her smile. One more day, she told herself. Just one more. The silence after the storm was louder than the wind. Mai woke on the 4th morning to brilliant sun on snow. She found John outside, saddling his horse. Sam sat on the porch steps, his face buried in his hands. Her stomach dropped. "You're leaving?" "Trail's clear," John said, not looking at her. "We've imposed enough." "You haven't," she started, but he cut her off. "We have." His voice was firm, but she heard the lie beneath it. He didn't want to go any more than she wanted them to leave. Sam lifted his head, his eyes red. "Miss Mai, please, can't we stay?" Mai's throat tightened. She looked at John, saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw worked like he was chewing words he couldn't say. "The shoe," she said suddenly. "It's fixed." John paused. "Let me check it." She moved past him, crouched by the horse, and ran her hand down its leg. The shoe was secure. "But this one's loose," she said, pointing to the front hoof. It wasn't, but he couldn't see from where he stood. John came closer, examined it, and frowned. "Damn. Must have missed it." "Should rest another day," Mai said, standing. "Can't risk laming him on the trail." Their eyes met. He knew she was lying. She knew he knew. But he nodded anyway. One more day. That afternoon, they worked side by side. Evening came soft and golden. They cooked together, moving around the small space like they'd done it 100 times. After Sam fell asleep, Mai and John stood outside under a sky impossibly clear with stars. "I should tell you something," John said quietly. Mai's heart stuttered. "Not yet." He looked at her, surprised. "When you're ready," she said. No rush. They stood close, breath mingling in the cold. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her. She wanted him to. But then Sam cried out from inside, a nightmare, and the moment shattered. John went to his son. Mai stayed outside, watching the stars blur. She was falling for them, both of them, and she had no idea who they really were. When she finally went inside, she saw them, torchlights moving up the valley trail. 3 riders, coming fast. John saw them, too. His face went hard as stone. "Get inside," he said. "Lock the door." But it was too late. Hoofbeats thundered into the yard. Gideon Croft sat his horse like he owned the mountain. He was younger than John, dressed in fine wool, his face carrying the soft arrogance of inherited wealth. 2 ranch hands flanked him, men with guns on their hips and dead eyes. "Heard you got company, Mai," Gideon called out, his voice dripping false concern. "Came to check you were safe from strays." Mai stepped forward, her chin lifted. "I'm fine. You can leave." Gideon's eyes slid past her to John, who stood silent in the doorway, Sam half hidden behind him. "Who's this?" Gideon asked. John said nothing, just stared, still as a predator. Gideon's smile sharpened. "A drifter. Mai, you know better than taking in his kind. People will talk." "Let them talk," Mai said, her voice cold. "Railroads coming through," Gideon continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Your land's in the path. I'm authorized to make you a fair offer. More than this rock pile's worth. Not for sale." "Shame," Gideon's tone turned cruel. "Bank notes due in spring. Heard you're already late on payments. Hate to see you lose everything your husband worked for." Mai's hands fisted at her sides. "How did he know?" John took a step forward. The movement was subtle, but Gideon's horse sidestepped nervously. "What's your name, friend?" Gideon asked, his voice tight. "Doesn't matter. A man who hides his name is hiding more." "Get off my land," Mai said, her voice shaking with fury now. Gideon laughed. "Your land? For how much longer?" He tipped his hat mockingly. "Think about my offer, Mai. Before you lose everything." He wheeled his horse and rode off. The sound of hoofbeats faded, leaving only the wind. When Mai finally turned to John, his face was closed, distant. "Tell me the truth," she said. "Who are you?" "A man trying to do right." That's not an answer. He met her eyes then, and she saw pain there, deep and old and raw. It's the only one I can give. Then leave, the words came out broken. In the morning. Take your secrets and go. Sam appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down his face. Miss Mai, no. I'm sorry, she whispered, but didn't know if she was apologizing to the boy or to herself. She went inside and closed the door. She didn't sleep, just listened to John packing their things in the pre-dawn darkness. Each sound was like a nail in her chest. She couldn't bear to watch them leave. Mai stood at her window as the sun rose, listening to John's low voice trying to console his sobbing son. We can't leave her, Pa, Sam cried. Son, she's the only home we've had since Mama died. The words pierced Mai's heart. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass, silent tears streaming down her face. She heard John lift Sam onto his horse, heard the creak of leather as John mounted. Then, hoofbeats growing fainter. Gone. Mai slid down the wall and wept, the first real tears since her husband's death. She'd survived 2 years alone through sheer will, but now she'd driven away the only people who'd made her feel alive. Hours passed. The knock startled her. She opened the door to find old Abner standing there, her nearest neighbor, a hermit who rarely ventured out. Saw them leaving, Abner said, his weathered face creased with concern. You sent them away, Mai nodded, not trusting her voice. Abner sighed. You know who that was. She shook her head. John Thorne Harrington. Railroad baron's heir. Richest family in 3 territories. The name hit her like a fist. Harrington, the railroad Gideon had mentioned. His wife died a year back, Abner continued. He walked away from the empire, took the boy. Been living rough ever since. Gideon found out. Plans to expose him in town tonight, force him back to the family, ruin whatever peace he's found. Mai's head snapped up. When? Happening now. Town square. She was already moving, grabbing her husband's coat, running for the shed. Storm's coming again. Abner called after her. I've ridden through worse, she shouted back. She saddled her mare with shaking hands and rode down the mountain like her life depended on it. Because maybe it did. The town came into view as night fell. A crowd was gathered in the square. Mai heard Gideon's voice, loud and performative. There he is. John Harrington, hiding like a coward. Mai kicked her horse faster. The crowd parted as she thundered through, pulling up hard in the center of the square. Gideon stood on the hotel porch, gesturing dramatically. John stood below, face like stone, Sam pressed against his side, crying. Mai dismounted, legs shaking, and walked through the mud and torchlight until she stood between John and Gideon. This woman has something to say, she announced, her voice ringing clear. Gideon sneered. Mai, this doesn't concern you. Call me poor, she cut him off, her voice rising. I am richer than any of you. I gave shelter in a storm. What have you given but judgment? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. He lied to you. Gideon insisted. He fixed my fence, Mai said, turning to the townsfolk. He taught his boy to gather eggs. He chopped enough firewood to last me the winter. He sat at my table and treated me like I mattered. Her voice broke. You want to call that using? Then I'll be used every day. John stepped forward, his voice steady and strong. She's right. I hid my name. But I didn't hide my work. Didn't hide my respect. He looked at Mai, his eyes full of everything he hadn't said. I'm sorry. I should have trusted you. Doesn't matter. Gideon shouted desperately. The bank note on her land's due. They're foreclosing tomorrow. John reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. Already paid. Bought her debt this morning before I left. The land is hers, free and clear. The crowd gasped. Mai stared. He'd paid it, even after she'd sent him away. You can't buy decency, Harrington, Gideon spat. Didn't buy it, John said quietly. Found it for free in a storm. The crowd parted. Gideon, his scheme crumbling, stalked away into the darkness. John turned to Mai. The land's yours. I didn't do it for, he trailed off. I just wanted you free. Mai stepped close enough to see the unshed tears in his eyes. And what about you? Are you free? Before he could answer, Sam ran to them, grabbing both their hands. He looked up at his father, then at Mai. Can we go home now? He whispered. Please. John looked at Mai. She looked back. And in that moment, she knew. Yes, Mai said softly. Let's go home. Spring transformed everything. Mai stood in the doorway of their cabin, watching Sam chase chickens through wildflowers. John had built a second room, a proper barn. He came up behind her now, wood shavings in his hair. He'd been building a cradle. I want to ask you something proper, John said. He held out his mother's ring, simple gold, worn smooth. Would you make this official? Not for the land, not for convenience, but because when I think about tomorrow, I only see it with you in it. Mai didn't answer with words. She walked to the mantel and took down her husband's pocket watch. She held it out to Sam. Your grandfather, she said softly. He was a good man. He'd want you to have it. Sam's eyes went wide. He looked at his father, then at Mai. Does this mean? It means yes, Mai said, smiling through tears. I said yes the day you first picked up my husband's axe. John pulled her close, and she felt his heart beating against hers, steady, strong, home. That evening, they stood together in the expanded doorway, Sam between them, holding their hands. Pa, Sam said quietly. Is this home now? John looked at Mai, and she smiled. Yes, son, John said. This is home. Summer warmed the ridge. They'd married in June, a simple ceremony with Abner as their witness. Now, in late August, she rested a hand on her swelling belly. The baby would come in winter, a full circle from the night 3 knocks had changed everything. John came inside from the yard and pulled her close. What are you thinking about? That night, she said. The storm. I think about it too, he pressed his forehead to hers. Best mistake I ever made, getting lost on that mountain. It wasn't a mistake, Mai murmured. It was Providence. That evening, after Sam fell asleep, they sat on the porch watching fireflies. Do you ever regret it? She asked quietly. Giving up your old life. John was quiet for a long moment. I didn't give it up, he said, tilting her chin up to kiss her softly. I traded it for something real. Best trade I ever made. The stars wheeled overhead. The cabin stood solid behind them, smoke curling from the chimney, its roots deep in the rocky soil. Like her, like them. She'd opened her door to strangers in a storm, a cowboy and his grieving boy. They had walked in and never left. And somewhere between the firewood and the fences, between the fear and the trust, they'd stopped being strangers. They'd become hers, and she had finally become theirs. The storm had passed, but what it left behind would last forever.